I'm Justin from Orange Umbrella. I've just recorded a quick video here following our automation seminar yesterday. I was asked a really interesting question by one of the attendees, and he said, well, I'm not using any fancy project management software. I'm not really sure I need to pay for something. I'm just using a Google Sheet very simply to look after my projects. And I wondered whether I could add a column in there for invoice 1 and invoice 2. So he bills halfway through a project and then at the end. Very simple. A lot of businesses that don't have huge amounts of work ongoing all the time and tend to be working on bigger projects, there's probably no reason why you can't be using a Google Sheet. So he said, is it possible for me to use that Google Sheet and get it to produce an invoice for me? Well, the answer to that is yes, we can do that. Now, I'm going to show you this in relation to Xero. We're a Xero partner, so we tend to focus on Xero. There are other accounting systems that Zapier will integrate with as well. So I've just very quickly loaded up Zapier, and I've done some pre-work on this just to give you an idea. So what we've got here is I've created a new trigger, which is a Google Sheet item. And I'll just quickly move over to my next tab, which is Google Sheet that I've created. So as you can see, I've put, very importantly, some headers at the top. You need to put these headers in place, otherwise your Zap will not work. This is the what Zapier is going to use in order to work out which column of information you want to process. So I've just added these quick columns in, first name, surname, etc. And then, as you can see, I've put 3 tests in because, as with all Zaps on Zapier, is that a bit of experimentation is required. And to be brutally honest, it didn't work first time for me, but I didn't give up. I kept going until it did actually work for me. So you can see I've put 3 test projects, but importantly here, I've put the total project value in. And I've put the invoice 1 and invoice 2 columns in. In reality, you're probably going to need 2 Zaps, one to process the invoice 1 when you're ready to do that, and a second Zap to do invoice 2. That's not terribly difficult to be able to build that. Once you've built the first one, you can actually just copy the Zap and modify it slightly. So you can see that I've got the test data here. Let's go have a look at how I've actually done this Zap. So what I've done is I've created my trigger. So this is the action that I want to happen within my Google Sheet that triggers other things. So I pick Google Sheets, that's great. And then I just move on to the, I'm just going to have to move my box there. Right, press the continue button. And I want to basically look as an option for a new or updated spreadsheet row. So if I press continue on that, I've got to connect to my Google Sheets account, which is great. And here we are. Here's the spreadsheet. I've got Zapier test, which is what I've named my Google spreadsheet. I'm just using one sheet, and at the moment I haven't renamed it. It's just defaulted to sheet 1. And the trigger column, all importantly, is invoice 1. If we go into here, you'll see why those headers are so important, because they're being brought in by Zapier in order for me to work out where it is. One thing I will mention about this is that I actually discovered during my experimentation is that if you add different columns of information to your spreadsheet, you must come back and review your Zap. It's using references to work out where those columns are. So if you change your spreadsheet, then your Zap may not work. And during my test phase, I actually suddenly found that I was invoicing for the total project value because I'd added an extra column in. So the referencing and the kind of the cell referencing that Zapier is using has actually moved. So once we're happy, we've selected the right column of information. So when we're ready to invoice the first part of our project, we want Zapier to detect that and raise an invoice. So the last time I tested this was about 16 minutes ago. So that should be fine. But obviously you want it to bring in some test data. The second step is once we've got our trigger sorted out, we want to create an action. And what we want to do with that action is create a sales invoice in Xero. So one thing I will mention at this stage is that Xero is a premium app within Zapier. So you need a paid for account in order to access it. Now, if you're one of our clients and you want to have a go with this yourself, we don't mind helping you get something set up so you can see whether it's going to work for your business. So once you've chosen Xero as the app of choice, we'll again press the continue button. What we want to do is our action is we want to create a new sales invoice. We'll move on to the next thing. Now I've added the Orange Umbrella Xero account as a separate account. I've got some other client Xeros for other apps, which was why we've got more options. But you will just see one account. We'll obviously need to first time press this button to connect account. It's very, very simple. You put in your username and password, and off you go. It worked first time for me. So this is where kind of the real magic of the Zap happens. Is I've set the contact name, and we've got these little boxes on the side where in this case I've chosen the company name to go into that box, and I've obviously set the email address by clicking that same box again. I actually have added a due date box onto my spreadsheet, but that's not so important in this case because I've set the status to draft because I want to review it. A common sort of complaint I hear from clients is that they're inputting data from one system to another. And this is the case in point with this example is we've got someone who's got perfectly good data within Google Sheets, but they're then having to go to a separate accounting system and actually input all that data all over again, which is just costing time. And ultimately that costs money. Now I've chosen my branding theme. I've just got a branding theme called Standard. And then this is the important thing to do with how the invoice is actually going to be set up. I always work in an ex-VAT way, but I can choose to work VAT inclusive if that's the way you work, if you're dealing with consumers, for example, or if you're not VAT registered, obviously the no tax element can be picked as well. I'm not using line item codes within my Xero, so I don't need to do that. But this time I've got a line item description. So again, from my spreadsheet, I've just put a very helpful little project description just to save me having to re-enter it again. And then I've put some freeform text and then I've put the surname in this example. It could be the company name or anything like that. The line item quantity, it's just going to be 1 because this is someone working in the service industry issuing a part invoice halfway through a project. And again, the line unit price is the all-important invoice 1 column that we've got here. So they're halfway through the project. So once we're happy, I'm not using any fancy tracking items within Xero. Obviously, Xero is an incredibly powerful accounting package and we can do really quite advanced things with it. But in this example, it's very, very simple. So we just press the continue button. This immediately has come back to me and said, well, based on the test data that you've already put in, and that actually test data was coming from the first line that I've got there. So it's basically said, yeah, the test is going to work. So the only thing I've got left to do is to finish my Zap and turn it on. Now, it's really, really important when you're building up a Zap to actually make sure you've got some test data in there, that you make sure it works as it's intended. What you can see here is I've got my Xero, my draft invoices open here, is that you can see this was when I was testing my Zap initially. And we can see that the last item on that spreadsheet was to James Smith. It was a £500 project. And actually, we decided to build the whole thing at the end. I think if we just put in some more data into here, you can actually see this app in action. So we're going to build John Smith. And we obviously have to put our project description, which is going to come onto the Xero as well. So he's someone who also wants some annual accounts and a similar project value. The due date isn't important unless we want to actually bring that into an invoice. So I'll not just skip over that step. It shouldn't affect the Zap at all. But this time we're only going to bill half of our project up front. So as soon as we've updated that spreadsheet row, Zapier should be working in the background to, because it's on, making sure that that invoice appears in Xero for us to review. And let's see whether at the moment of truth it works. Sometimes it's not there straight away. There can be a little bit of a lag in the program. while it works out what's actually going to happen. It's not always an instantaneous process of it detecting the information. But as you can see, I have put in that item there so you can see how it does actually work. And if we go into that invoice itself, we can see annual accounts for Smith has actually been put in. It's obviously put the right contact name in there. It's put a date in. We still need to fill in the due date. We might have a purchase order reference for maybe a larger company that we need to enter. But the other thing that we could have done in the Zap as well is we could have chosen an account code just to save us time. It obviously knows what the VAT rate is. I do have a tracking category for our staff. In the case of this example, I'm not sure it's necessary. But one of the great things is when we're ready to email that invoice out to the client, it's because I've already pulled that data in from the Google Sheet. It's actually already there. I'll go back and see whether that invoice has actually appeared yet, which I'm not sure it has, unfortunately. Right, no, unfortunately. I think it's just that there is a little bit of a lag on the system. So we'll maybe I'll pause for a second and see whether it's actually going to come in. Practically as I press the pause button there, the invoice has actually loaded up into Xero. So you can see that data that we've entered into that Google Sheet for John Smith has actually, it has appeared in Xero as if by magic. What you can find is as you've built up your Zap and you start working with it, you might say, well, actually, I want to send these through to a different category of maybe awaiting approval or something like that, just to make it easier for you to do. You might start applying account codes to things as well to just to save you time with inputting the due date. Again, you could have something going in there automatically. If you use a standard referencing, again, that's no problem at all. Anyway, I hope that's been really useful to you. And if you've got any questions, please let me know. Thanks very much. Bye.